I'm very excited to celebrate our Centennial Ranches of Johnson County, Part 3. You're going to be hearing Taylor Cove first from the 4 Mile Ranch, and then you're going to hear from Nancylee, Beattie, and Tammy Miller from the Mike A. Hakert Ranch, and then you'll hear from Travis Hakert at the end from the Richard and Donna Hakert Ranch. I want to give a big thanks out for all the people who are attending this evening. This is our first virtual format, so I hope it goes well. I really want to thank all of you supporting this program. As you are aware, it was a pay what you want scale. We know funds are tight during COVID, and we were blessed to have a sponsor for us. So I'd like to give a big thank you out, not only to all of you who have made donations for this, but Western Ranches, Bighorn Real Estate Associates, Christie's International Real Estate, and Jillian Smith Real Estate here in town. We're so thankful that they thought this was a worthy program and is the major sponsor for this. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Nancylee and Tammy?
I'm Nancylee, and it's where I grew up, my homestead. And this is my daughter, Tammy.
I had the privilege of interviewing Nancy and recording her presentation in February. I'm so excited the family was pleased with the end results. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and play Nancy's presentation. Do y'all see the video?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful.
Beattie, and I'm supposed to tell you something about our homestead, which my father homesteaded in 1960. That was 103 years ago. My dad was born in Minnesota. He was raised there, and when he was in his 20s, bought a farm because now he was getting ready to set up housekeeping. He met my mother, Leora Gibbard, and they were married. We had one little girl at the homestead. While he had been there, he was one of 12 children, and my grandfather and grandmother were in charge of the farm. They still do have it there in their family. In those first years, they heard about the homesteads that were being let here in Wyoming to people from away. And they thought, man, my dad was saying, there's a lot of brothers and sisters. We've got a lot to do, and we all need places to live. Let's go look at it. So the boys all did, of the family. Came back to Minnesota and told their grandpa about this wonderful land where the grass was as tall as the horses' knees. This would be great. They actually believed all this, and all of them sold their lands and boarded the train and their animals and got on the move to Wyoming to see what was really there. Into Wyoming, the railroad only went as far as Watts Landing, and that was where they got the horses and buggies to find the rest of the way to Buffalo. During this time, Grandpa's homestead on one piece of land, and soon all of them were old enough also homesteaded around him and signed the papers to prove up on it. I think it was 5 years it took them to prove that it was their land. This was very great because there were 11 of them that were actually getting that much older. And one sister did go to Montana to homestead with her husband, as she had already made that with Aunt Julia Phillips. So she was not here. 4 of the kids were too young yet to be on homesteads, but 2 of the brothers were just the right age, but there was a war breaking out over in Europe. And so the 2 boys went to service. John and Andrew Hakert both were killed or died before they came back from home from being in the service. That left grandfather with a few less people. He then homesteaded on Klondike Ranch also and took it over. So there were many Hakert places all joining each other as neighbors. They wanted me to say something about why we have 2 names, Hakert and Hakert. It was because the name when it came from Austria was actually Hakert. But later, when the kids grew up, the second generation came to the United States, that the teachers didn't like the spelling. It didn't sound like that. There was supposed to be a C in it, and so the younger children, sisters, and teachers talked them into putting a C into it. So they are Hakert, Hakert, and the older kids of the same family are Hakert. That was us, Hakert. That was quite a while ago when they were growing up back in Minnesota. In the meantime, when they first moved to the homestead, Carol was on the homestead the first years. After that was born Hazel. Hazel married Bill Baldwin later in Buffalo and became my teacher at a country school. Also, Layla went back to teaching after she finished college and taught me my 6th and 7th grades. Because she too was a teacher now, as having married Orange Taylor's son, and he was killed in the war in France during this time. Andrew, however, was growing up, and when he was being 16, like all the other boys here in Johnson County, they were very wanting to take part in the war effort and help this country because it was theirs. They were going with it. Dad signed the papers and he went to service. Here he taught people how to fly airplanes, and then afterwards, when he came home, he had cancer and lost his leg, and he died at age 23. And that year that I was born, in 1933, Dad was working at many small jobs around Buffalo, and including the railroad was coming to Buffalo. But some of the equipment fell through the bridge and injured his back. That first year, he was my babysitter, taking care of me as a baby, because now I had come to be a part of their family. But he couldn't work, so Mother took care of the things that she could keep together. And Dad oversaw me when we lived at the homestead until I was 6. Dad built a little house there for us. And now, since he is getting over his injury, he can sit in the back of the pickup and tell me how to drive it. It was a wicked old pickup. It only had one gear, and it just creaked along through a lot of holes and ruts and so forth. But I could steer it, and he could pull the hay off to feed the cows and the horses during the winters. But as Dad said, we'd get by, and we did, the 3 of us on the homestead. After he was hurt on the railroad, he could not raise himself up to get on the horse. He could walk with his canes up to the horse, but not get on. So we taught his horse to kneel, and he would kneel down and sit on the ground. And we would take Dad up by the horse and pick his leg up and put it over the saddle and put him in the saddle. Once he was there, his balance was good, and he could ride all over. We rode the pasture every day when I was small and saw to it that way. And he could tell me all the different ways of doing things. I even learned how to put in post holes, and he always said they were pretty good. At least he said so. By the time I was 6, he was really helping him do many things because he would figure out a way that a 6-year-old could fill in. And he would throw the hay off of the back of the pickup and sit on the floor. And I would drive the car with that funny old compound that wouldn't stay put. It was kind of different. But we got our livestock all through. George Hakert, of course, he was next on the north. On the east was his sons and him. And then on the south was Mr. McBride coming in, and Mr. Eder had been in charge of the west land of us. And he later sold to a large Basque family who still lives there and owns that. But the people in that country were very, very helpful with everybody else. If you had a job to do, if you had to round up the cattle, or if you had to do something else that was going to be a big job, George Hakert and many of the others would come from around, and everybody would work together with you. It was like a big roundup, helping you get them in the pen or where you wanted them, or put them in the trucks to be shipped or whatever had to be done. The people have always been a great help to each other to make things work. 20 head of cows and about 200 to 400 sheep. In the beginning, when he was capable, we didn't realize that we weren't going to have enough manpower. But like I said, if it weren't for the people around who came when you had to have do things with a bunch, then Uncle George and all his help would show up and say, "Okay, what are we doing today?" At the homestead as a child, we had many animals: horses, cows, sheep, pigs. We really raised sheep is what we did. At shearing time, my dad would take our bands over to Mr. Henderson's, which was next door at that time. And he was what they call blade man. He used those great big clippers and clipped the sheep. He could shear a sheep in 3 minutes without hurting them, which was really pretty good for somebody doing it mechanically. Now everything's done by machine. But during that time, when you'd get there, many times the guys would say, "Hey, how about dropping some of the wool for us?" And they would pick you up and put you on top of the shed where there was a hole with a great big sack hanging down through the hole that was held by rain so it wouldn't fall through. And they'd put you down in the sack. And then they'd start throwing the wool pieces from the sheep into the sack as they got them shorn. And you were supposed to tromp them down and make them as small as possible. So you'd have to tromp wool until you got it high enough you could crawl out before they would let you out. But I was about 6 or 7 during many of those years. By the time I was 10 and in grade school, they didn't have to do that so often. It seemed like they started to be afraid of girls. It was different. with Depression days, with war rationing and stamps, and all the families, my then the sisters, and mother and father all would take their stamps and use the ones they needed for who needed what next, and shared with the need of it. So we shared the Depression days and didn't even really know we had them. After Andrew went to service, he was 10 years older than I was. So when he went to service, we didn't have any manpower left. And that was why I had helped Dad with the haying and all that. He was stuck with one 6-year-old to fill in. And it was amazing. Like he said, it's okay. There's a will, we'll do it. And we did. And the livestock all survived the winter, despite us. With the war efforts, the girls went to California and worked on the war effort to help rebuild ships, and their husbands went to. At the time when Carol and Hazel were helping their husbands with the war effort, we kept their 2 little babies who were just barely a month old when we first took them to the homestead with us. So Mom and Dad and I had babies. That was different. Later on, when they grew up, they're the ones who frequently came and stayed with us because Grandma's was home. There were no children at all, and I was technically an older child. Everybody else had grown up. One time, there was a mama skunk who died, and there were 10 little baby skunks that Dad found. He picked them all up in a sack and brought them home to the cabin. And he said, I will descent them if you want to keep them as pets. Otherwise, we're not going to keep skunks. So that's what we did. And I would hold them, and he would remove that little scent bag, and then they made really good pets. They were like having little kitties on a leash. And there were 10 of them. And they all ran around. They would follow you when you'd walk. And come when you'd call them. It was very much like 10 more little fellows that were friends. There wasn't much she couldn't do, but Dad tried really hard to make it so she didn't have as hard. Because, like I said, we couldn't keep having so many cows, and dropped the sheep, and then finally he leased the land when I was going to be gone because she wouldn't have me to help either. And everybody else was married and moved away, and Andrew was gone. So our manpower was not there to say you could count every day on it. But everybody did the best they could and worked together. During the summer times, several summers, my father also herded sheep for other people with their bands, and he would herd several of them in the mountains. And Mother and Dad and I would go and live in the mountains at the Freeman camp for those 3 months, which was a summer where we had someone who brought us food once a month and oversaw the needs of our camp. And we herd maybe 200 to 400 head of sheep. It was a beautiful place, having a lot of fun. It was on Poison Creek. First water on the homestead came from up the draws in the little springs and was hauled by bucket or barrel to the house. Afterward, when Andrew was a little older, he took the first well. But later on, we went ahead and had a new well drilled, and the water came to us from the windmills and went into a cistern to be piped down to the house. Now, after that, we now have a new well within this last few years, and the water came in quite well, and it's very good water. It could be used. It's used for livestock and for anything where we need it, and we get it with a generator rather than going with the windmill like we did then. So that was how we got water to everything. And now if you want water, we just go out and turn it on. And we had an outhouse. It moved sometimes, but we had an outhouse. Now it moved around different places that way. There has never been any electricity out of our farm. However, the neighbors have since got a very nice well and all water that they would want. That way, as well as electricity, and you can even receive telephone. It's not that, so they are very modern. The longer ones with the iron rods are used to brand cattle and not large animals because they have to be heated in the fire and they actually burn their hide to get the brand to show. So they will burn off the lettering and it will say like MAH. And when it heals, and it will stay that way all their life, and you can see that cow from a distance. And I have it on 2 horses. One of them is rather funny about because we had them in down here for the vet to do it for us. You know, and I'm hobbled on the horse. These horses got his head on my chest like this and has been premedicated because he will get the hot brand. And so while he's like this and I'm like this, all of a sudden the vet says, "Oh!" He puts the brand on backwards and upside down. And so he's even listed that way on their brand records. They are branded as Baker carries because he's upside down. And it was, but the vet did it, I didn't. Those 2 horses are at Klondike right now. And my cousin, who has Klondike, uses them for his guests to ride in the summer times. The little one is just, the MAH was a short handle, and you just simply take and dip into your can of paint and take it out, and after the sheep has been shorn, it has a new one. You stamp it on, the paint on and there it is, MAH, and you can see him. Each year he gets a new brand, that one. But the other guy, his is a lifetime thing, and he wears it. There was one blizzard that stood out. Many people remember it forever, 1949. Such a blizzard. It closed everything down. It snowed for 6 weeks. And the snow came up over the fence tops, down out of the homestead. My dad said you couldn't even see what our fence was anymore. And there were planes that dropped food for the animals. Many outfits here lost their animals because they couldn't get out of the jaws they were snowed in. It was a tough time for many people that year. I was in high school and stayed here with my sister Hazel right here at this very house. And I didn't see my parents for 6 weeks. because during that time they couldn't come in and I couldn't go out and we couldn't go anywhere. But that was a bad place. Everybody who survived because God wanted them to. And then they just came and went. And Dad had bought this place here back when Carolyn and Hazel were starting to school, because at first he had taken my horse back over to Uncle George's to school every day, and that was 5 miles. And that was hard for little girls. And then, of course, when Andrew went away, he still had me, but he had the girls. And rather than be traveling in the snow with the horses, they bought this place from the railroad, and we added to it. And since then, it's been their family home in town for, there's where you have the livestock and water them and feed them. And here was where, if you had to do something in town or went and go to school, Mother would stay with the girls here. Hazel got her certificate in teaching, so I graduated from 8th grade with her as my teacher. Later, when Hazel moved to town, I came and went to high school and stayed with her during the week to attend school. But we still lived at the homestead, and I would go and stay with Mom and Dad for weekends. After high school, I went to Kansas to a nurse's training, where I received my degree. My first year's home there was here in Buffalo, where it was just beginning to have a brand new hospital, which is part of the hospital now, here in Buffalo, where it first began. And I worked there for nearly 18 years. After that time, and during that time, I met Jim Mallard and married him. There was Cameron Miller, who now is retired and lives with me, and worked for the government and lived back east most of her life. Then there was Stacy Webster, who was married to a lawyer in Dallas, and has several grandsons. And next was Andrew Miller, who now lives out in the Washington state, where he runs a Subaru dealership and fixes cars, not cows. Nowadays it's cars. And lives there. He has 3 sons, so I just finished with high school and now grade school. And we do not know where they will all be headed yet. Time will tell. Last was Hazel Michelle Miller, and she is married to Paul Wright, lives here in Buffalo, and does a lot of jobs, especially painting. She is our youngest and is also a college graduate. During the time that we lived in Texas, where we followed Jim when he went to work, we leased the homestead to J.D. Elson Ranch, and because he raised sheep, the ranch was being used for grazing livestock. J.D. was the rancher who lived next door to us, I would say, my sister's husband, and oversaw this until I returned from Texas. He got a divorce, and I raised 8 children for 10 years, and then I met Harvey Beattie and was married in 1981. Harvey traveled a lot, being a mason bricklayer and setting up stockyards in different big cities like Phoenix and so forth. And at the end of that year, he was using more, and by the time I came home from college, he had to be in a wheelchair all the time. They did it until about 1981 or so when my dad got so he just couldn't keep things going very good at all. And then they just came and went. Mother died in 1985, and Dad was just a little bit before that, not much. And so they've both been gone for quite a while. My dad always was looking to when he rode, and we'd ride. He'd say, if you see an arrowhead, look at the stop and pick it up, which we did. So we rode the range a lot of days, especially when we had a band of sheep, because there were so many coyotes and things some of the years, and they were pretty bad with livestock. And when we found arrowheads, he would bring them home, and he had a beautiful pot of arrowheads that my sister had. It was and some really perfect ones. So one of the rocks that we found out there that evidently had been used by the Indians. I think they ground their meal or something like that because it has a perfect grain that so Saturday must have sent something here and like this. One of the things that Dad found out on the range one day was a skull. He found a bigger one too, which we also have, but it's much more deteriorated than this one. There weren't many artifacts that big ever that we. He also found some teepee rings. There was one area where the teepee rings must have been because there were water holes, and Indians must have camped there at one time. It wasn't until later years that the rocks that marked the teepees were kicked apart and we couldn't see them anymore. The skulls, we only found 2 of them. One of them, like I said, was the bigger one, and then this one. But there were a lot of arrowheads at one time in all that area. He found many of the arrowheads, and some of them were very pretty and totally full instead of just chipped. But it has been a long time now because they've mostly been found. The feathers on this particular one are turkey feathers. That is because in Wyoming we haven't been allowed to have eagle feathers on any of the artifacts unless you are the Indians itself. 1996, I retired and came home. Yay, that was neat. In later days, better houses were built on the homestead. Then we had it first. But now there is nothing out there because my oldest sister moved to a different piece of land, and the house was not big enough, and now she had 8 children. So we gave her our house and let her move it over there, and took her house away. 3 sisters decided they did not want to keep the land anymore as they were so much older. They were much older than I was, and they have sold their share of the homestead, but they were kind enough to leave me 360 acres that is still mine. And although I have no electricity or anything, it's a place where, if it ever is, you can be put. The neighbors are all happy now. And it has been a great place. It was a good place to grow up. We really enjoyed it very much. And I still love it. We go for picnics. And nowadays it is simply grazing for animals, and my next door neighbor oversees it for me. And close the lease on the grass for it, because I cannot do most of that work anymore. We have a good well. We have a generator that pumps water up and puts a little reservoir for holds water for the stock and can be managed easily. And so it is quite convenient for him, and he is very good about it. My dad would have been so very proud to have been a part of the growth of Wyoming. This plaque on the wall we received 2 summers ago now from the state of Wyoming to commemorate the fact that he homesteaded 100 years ago to begin with growing in Wyoming. And we got to go to Douglas and spend time down there while they presented it. There's a picture on the wall of everybody and the governor and all who stood in the picture with it. And most of my family came from everywhere. They're all scattered farm-wide to get their picture taken, seeing the fact that their grandfather helped to plant the land.
So that is the end of the video. I want to open it up for questions now for Nancylee and Tammy. Let us know if you had any questions or any comments. I know there was a lot of name dropping in the video because obviously Nancylee's dad was one of 12. Nancylee, could you tell us who each of your siblings, which family they married into so that they can make the connections?
Siblings, you mean the kids?
Papa Mike's.
Papa Mike's family. George's Hakert. It has Travis, who's going to talk for you. He's one of the grandsons from that family. 4 of the boys did not have children. They carried it on. And the girls, there was a Carney that does not live here. I'm trying to think if there are any around here. There are not very many. Uncle George's family, Klondike Ranch people, are all Hakert. Mary Hakert married Leo Taz, and they ran the Klondike, and now their son has it and runs it, and it is a cattle ranch. And right here is the big ones. So they are still here. We don't have many Hakerts right here anymore. They're scattered far and wide. They went as far as California, even some overseas. Because of those 4 boys did not have young fellows to follow their way. And some of them went to Montana. And the girls, their names were all changed. Like Aunt Kate's was one that she did not live here afterward and was never part of Wyoming, Buffalo. And they did not get to know them. So Donna and Richard Hakert are the ones that I know the best around. And then those from Klondike.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions is, where specifically is the Hakert Ranch located?
My ranch land, it is 3.5 miles off of the Trabing Road. Out here where you turn off on the Trabing Road, you take off at 1.5 miles and go to the north 1.5 miles, and that's my ranch. And what I have left now that's mine is small,
because of course my sister sold theirs about 2 years ago, but that is where ours was. And then their ranches around there, Uletta Elsom was married to J.D. Elsom. Their ranch, most of that is just south of there, about a mile and a half.
So your sister was an Elsom, and that was Eulalia. How about Hazel or Carol?
Carol married would you say a builder? He worked on all the reservoirs and the different things around, but never stayed here in Johnson County. He had been Howard Hippler, but he grew up in Buffalo. But he was gone, and they are more located in Green River, Wyoming. Their family. Hazel's family has settled at Riverton, Wyoming, and that's where they are living, except for Robbie. Robbie Schlichting is her grandson, and he lives here in Buffalo. And a lot of people here will know him. He's pretty well known through the hospital where he used to work. I know. Andrew's family, because he died so young, are not really known here. His son lives in Sheridan, and of course he's named Hakert, but he never lived over here. And then, of course, you only had Eulalia, who had the Elson Ranch just south of Buffalo, about 15 miles. And then Carol later, and then Hazel, and then Andrew. And that was a long time to hike him on. And now I'm here and retired in Buffalo. And my one daughter lives here, Hazel Michelle Wright. And the other oldest one lives here with me, Tammy Miller. I've got one daughter in Dallas. And so they're kind of scattered too.
Now, another question being asked is, this is about your neighbors, okay? Do you or anyone in your family remember John Winchester of somewhat dubious?
I do.
You do? What is your memory of John Winchester then?
To me, he was a very nice man. They all just treated me as my dad's kid, and were nice to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about all I can say. Because I didn't really know older people like that very well.
Mm-hmm. All right, those were the only two questions that have come in. So I'm going to call a 5-minute break just so that we can get ready for our last speaker. So if anyone wants to partake of a beverage or just a food break, I will turn my video off and mute, and we'll get ready for Travis and the other Hakert Ranch.